Richard Carleton, CEO of the Canadian Securities Exchange. Richard, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So what's new and exciting at the CSE this year?
We're having a great year. If you take a look at our website, you'll see that we recently reported on our first two-quarter performance. Trading is up more than 67% over the previous two quarters in 2015. And we continued to lead the listings parade in Canada with a number of new companies that have come to the exchange over the first 6 months of the year.
Who are some of these new companies? What type of company is listing on the CSE?
You know, it's a broad set of companies. We obviously saw a lot of interest in gold exploration companies as the price of gold began to recover early in the year. A number of companies were getting funding, and a number of previously private companies were coming onto the exchange. We've also seen a continued interest in the technology space. For example, we have two drone companies that have joined the exchange within the last few months. But a broader range of companies in the technology space, from life sciences, software development, security systems, just the whole gamut.
So there's no specific profile necessarily. Why would a company want to list on the CSE as opposed to another exchange?
We really pitch ourselves as being the source of low-cost capital, or the lowest source of capital for early-stage companies in Canada. We principally do that in a couple of ways. I mean, the first one obviously is our fees have to be competitive with alternatives in Canada. But more importantly, our listings process is very lean. Okay? We focus on what's important. We try to be very quick in turning around the decisions that we make as an exchange for companies that are looking to list. That time saving actually translates into a tremendous amount of money: lower legal costs, lower accounting costs, and lower advisory costs. So that, as I say, translates to the company in real savings and a faster time to market.
What would you say, Richard, to an investor who might be hesitant to buy a CSE-listed stock with concerns of lack of liquidity?
You know, there was a time when a number of the discount brokerages did not provide electronic access to the Canadian Securities Exchange. That is not the case now. We have full access from all of the Canadian discount brokerages offered by the Canadian banks and all but one of the independent discount brokers. When we look at the liquidity profile for the companies listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange, it's actually identical to the liquidity profile of their peers listed on other exchanges in Canada. You know, liquidity is really not a function of what exchange you're listed on. It's how effectively you tell your story and how effectively you engage with the investment community, particularly the retail side.
Richard, what's your take on the sort of current level of regulation here in Canada?
Well, it's a real challenge. We have to make sure that we preserve access to capital for early stage companies. At the same time, balance that against interests in protecting investors. We at the Canadian Securities Exchange believe that the best way to do that is through enhanced disclosure. So, for example, all of our companies are required to file a monthly statement basically saying what they've done for the last 4 or 5 weeks. Right? It's a very informal management discussion and analysis. It's an easy way for existing investors and potential investors to engage with the company and really find out what's going on. What are they doing to achieve the goals that the company set for itself? Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like a self-regulation.
Very much so. Mm-hmm. But it also gives these companies an opportunity to do more aggressive outreach to the investment community, using that statement as a platform to tell their story to a broader audience.
And Richard, how would you characterize investor sentiment at the moment, especially when it comes to things like small cap stocks?
We've actually had the busiest summer we've ever had. The pace of new listings coming into the market typically slows down in July and August, and that has been the case this year. But what's been really interesting to see is that secondary market trading, so the day-to-day turnover of stocks, is as close to as high as it's ever been. In July, we routinely saw days of more than 35 million shares traded on the exchange, which for us is close to our record highs.
And are you seeing a lot of international interest in the CSE?
We've always had international interest in the Canadian small and micro cap markets. And I think in part that comes from our heritage as a natural resources community, right? really didn't matter, where the exploration project was taking place. People were often coming to Canada to raise the money for that project. That's given us a lot of expertise and skills that we can bring to other areas, and we do see a lot of foreign domiciled companies coming to Canada to raise that 10 or 15 or $20 million that's typical in the small cap space, whereas in their home market they might be restricted to bank debt or private equity or venture capital. And there are a lot of attractions, a lot of benefits to raising the money publicly, particularly for technology companies. And so we've seen, for example, a lot of technology companies come up from the United States in the last year and do raises from the Canadian public markets. We think that's great. We also have people that are looking for opportunities in Asia, in China, and South Asia. We have folks looking at additional opportunities for us in the United States. We do roadshows with our companies in Europe. So we're very much looking beyond Canadian borders to bring new investment opportunities to Canadian investors.
Is there anything coming up on the horizon over the near term?
Well, we'll be at the Mines and Money Show in Toronto in early September. We will be running a IPO boot camp for public companies in Vancouver later in October. We'll be at the Mines and Money Show in London, England in early December. I'll probably have an Asian trip at some point in November. And I'm sure I'll be at 6 or 7 or 8 other places between now and then.
Mm-hmm. Now, Richard, where can our viewers go to find out more information about the Canadian Securities Exchange?
Our newly redeveloped website is at thecse.com. And I'd particularly encourage people to take a look at the CSE Quarterly. Mm-hmm. It's an electronic magazine that comes out, oddly enough, 4 times a year. And it showcases typically 6 to 7 companies that typically have recently listed on the exchange, interviews with senior management, and a little background about what the company is looking to achieve. There are a lot of interesting stories that people can learn about.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, Richard.
My pleasure again. Thanks, Angela.
And for Small Cap Power, I'm Angela Harmantis.